And we are back here on the Analytical Iowan podcast. It is Thursday, February 12th, as you are listening to this. And we've got a lot to talk about because there's always a lot to talk about. Still fighting with some of my technical issues and getting these podcasts up. For some reason, getting the single videos up is a lot easier because I'm using TikTok Studio to post them ahead. And then I have an automation program in the background that is moving them everywhere. So that's why those are getting up more conveniently. But we still got a lot to talk about. Now, something I failed to mention yesterday in the podcast. We had this incident with the El Paso airspace. That would have been on Wednesday. Wednesday morning, there was an incident. Maybe it was late Tuesday night. I'm not sure where there was a call to shut down the airspace over El Paso, and the FAA said they were shutting it down for 10 days. Now, that is a full shutdown, similar to what they had to do after 9/11, and everybody was freaking out. And there were multiple reasons people were throwing out there. Some people thought it had something to do with the Epstein files and moving Ghislaine Maxwell. Um, and while she is in a prison in Texas, she is hundreds of miles away. That is not the case. Some people thought it had to do with the drug cartels and Donald Trump finally making an attack on Mexico and that we might have been going to war. Well, apparently it did have something to do with the cartels or indirectly. Apparently, the Department of Defense, because I refused to call it the War Department, decided that it was a good idea to go ahead and test this anti-drone technology. And they were going to be doing it over public airspace. This is similar to what they decided to do um, for the 250th birthday of the Marine Corps, where they were firing missiles over a public freeway. And apparently, there was no communication or not enough communication between the Department of Defense and the FAA. And when this thing started, the FAA freaked out because they didn't know what was going on and decided that for public safety, the best thing to do was to shut down El Paso airspace and disrupt everybody's flights and all of that. And they said 10 days because they didn't know what was going on. Like I said, the Department of Defense did not give them that direction. They did not say, hey, we are doing XYZ. It's only going to be for a couple of hours, and it shouldn't pose a risk to commercial flights or anything like that. They didn't know. And you have the military out here using technology and lasers and things like that in this anti drone technology. And they were just as much in the dark as the American public. So when it's all said and done, the El Paso airspace was reopened early Wednesday. It was only down for a few hours, not 10 days, but it just shows the lack of communication between these departments and how you don't have anybody serious at the top. Now, if there had been an actual head of the Department of Defense, again, refusing to call it the Department of War, that they would have done something different. They would have gone through and said, hey, we're doing this. We need this much airspace. You know, don't worry about it. Well, apparently, what they were testing or what they thought was drones, uh, either they thought they were being attacked by drones or it was a test and they were using balloons. I'm not sure which way it went, but it ended up being a party balloon that they shot down. Nothing serious and no major threat to the United States. But that didn't stop people from freaking out. And the fact that we have somebody at the top in Donald Trump who is suffering from dementia the way he is suffering, and is more than willing to just go into or attack another country. We've seen it. He still threatens to go into Greenland. He has gone into Venezuela. He talks about taking military action against Cuba and against Canada and Mexico. Um, it's not outside the realm of possibility, and it causes people a lot of concern. And if it wasn't for the fact that Donald Trump was in charge or claims to be in charge as the president of the United States, um, we would have other problems here. Like we wouldn't be thinking these things about what they're doing. We wouldn't be worried about them going into Mexico. It is because there is incompetence all the way at the top and at every step along the way. Again, if we would have had a decent Secretary of Defense, they would have coordinated with the FAA, and they probably would have, even if it was just a test, put out some kind of a notice to the public in the El Paso area saying, "Hey, we're doing this. Be ready." But they didn't do that. They said no, and that is typical of this administration. They're doing what they want. They think that whatever they do is going to be cheered by the masses, regardless of how it looks. And then when it blows up in their face, they're going to have somebody to blame. Now, it wouldn't surprise me if the person with the FAA who shut down the airspace ultimately gets fired. And they're going to say, well, he overreacted. But did he? Was it an overreaction if he didn't know the full extent of what was going on? And I say he, assuming, I think I remember reading that it was a guy. I don't remember. Um, so if they chose to, shut down the airspace as an abundance of caution, and then they get fired over it, is that really what we should be doing here? Or is this just a way for, you know, this administration to save face? Now, Donald Trump was given another prize. I talked about it yesterday. He was given this champion of good clean coal prize, like world champion of good clean coal prize, and he was talking about it. And you should hear the clip of him trying to say world champion. I think it was like undisputed, and he just it translates into nothing but a spew of words. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It turns into gibberish. Then he turns around. He says, "Well, Mike, well, when did this come out or something?" And he tries to catch himself and go. He had another event on television. Now, some people are suggesting that he might have had a mini stroke or something like it, and that is possible. He's just tripping over words constantly. And if you look at his vocabulary, one of the things about people who have had strokes, um, their vocabulary starts to become limited, and they use words unintentionally. They say things that they don't entirely mean. I know somebody who had a stroke several years ago, and during that event, um, for weeks after, could not come up with another negative uh, descriptive word other than bad. Oh, I didn't like. Oh, they served me this for lunch, but I didn't like it. It was bad. Oh, that tastes bad. Could not think of anything other than the word bad. Now, has since regained some of the vocabulary. But you look at Donald Trump, and he starts to, he's always using the same vocabulary. Oh, you're a nasty woman, or, you know, oh, you're part of the fake news media. He doesn't use a large vocabulary. Now, he never did. Donald Trump was never a smart man, not in the least. But it's getting worse because of the events going on. And you add this to everything else surrounding Donald Trump and his health, and it makes you wonder, how much longer does he have left? Now, if he has been suffering from dementia for 10 plus years, um, he could be coming toward the end. Now, remember, I talked about it the other day. There was an email from Jeffrey Epstein to somebody talking about having dinner with Donald Trump while he was president, and saying that they were concerned then that he was starting the beginning stages of dementia, talking about how Donald Trump couldn't recognize old friends, and they were having concerns. Well, 10 years seems to be the upper end of people with dementia. Now, Donald Trump could survive longer because he does have access to some of the best health care. If he is suffering from it that long, it is only going to continue to get worse. And there's going to come a point, potentially, when Congress and the cabinet and JD Vance are going to have to make a move because it is going to be worse for them if they don't. And when they make that move, it is going to be quick, fast, and in a hurry. They may use the Epstein files if something comes out that Donald Trump was in the files, which we have seen. Um, they brought it up in the hearing with Pam Bondi the other day that he was in the files, over 1 million references to Donald Trump, which means he was mentioned in the Epstein files more times than uh, Jesus is mentioned, or God is mentioned in the Bible, or Harry Potter is mentioned in the Harry Potter series through all 7 books. That is a lot. Um, and with all of it, there's a thousand. If there's 1 million mentions of Donald Trump, and there was only about 6 million files, that's a sixth of the time. That is something like 17, 18%. That is atrocious. Well, what are they going to do with this information? We don't know yet. Now, if something comes up that they can't get away from, that they can't twist, um, I still believe that they are going to use the files as their method to get rid of Donald Trump, and that they are going to impeach him over it. And when they do, it is going to be quick, fast, and in a hurry, and it's going to turn into a dog pile. I think they're going to open that vote, and when they do, they are going to end up. Uh, you're going to watch the vote in real time, and it's going to slowly be like, well, maybe they'll get there, maybe they won't, and then they will end up hitting the 218 mark, and you are just going to see a flood of uh, yes votes. And then when it goes to the Senate, I fully expect them to have the votes. Now, they may do something similar to what they did with Nixon. And if you remember, now I'm not old enough to remember Watergate, but I have studied Watergate. That in the Nixon Watergate scandal, what they did is I think it was the Speaker of the House went to Nixon and said, "Hey, you better resign. We have the votes to impeach and remove you." And they could do the same thing for Donald Trump and say, "Hey, we've got the votes." But would that work? Probably not. Donald Trump is not going to be the type to take that lying down and say, "Oh yeah, I agree. I'm going to walk away." That's not who he is. That is not Donald Trump's mentality. His mentality is going to be to hit back harder. He's going to come out with a whole bunch of things. "Oh, you're just rhino. It's fake news. It's this and that's that." So they may make that offer, and if he comes out and starts attacking them, expect them to make that move quick, fast, and in a hurry. And there's already signs that they are breaking from Donald Trump. We've been talking about it. Now, last night, yesterday, Wednesday, they had votes in the House of Representatives, and they passed a couple of things. First of all, they passed a resolution ending uh, the emergency declaration for Canada. Now, that means Donald Trump and his ability to leverage tariffs against Canada uh, would come to an end in theory. Now, I think the Senate has already passed something similar, so this could be on its way to Donald Trump's desk to be signed. And of course, he's going to veto it. Or what he might do unintentionally, not even realizing he did it, is try to ignore it. And if he ignores it and doesn't sign it within 10 days, it would actually become law. And that is entirely possible. If somebody around him doesn't tell him it's sitting there because he doesn't read anything, they could put it on his desk. He doesn't look at things, right? And he would have no curiosity to pick up a sheet of paper and go, "Well, what is this? Should I be worried about it?" And unless there's a very simplified synopsis on the front, because we have heard, even going back to his first term, that he doesn't read anything beyond 1 page. So if they do that, then he could end up ignoring it entirely and say, "Well, there's nothing to see here. It's not a big deal." And that would be bad for Donald Trump. Now, if they pass this and if it does somehow become law, that would end the emergency declaration. It would stop Donald Trump from having the tariffs on Canada. And there's going to be more and more votes on this, um, because the House is planning a barrage of votes against Donald Trump. Now, specifically in regards to the tariffs. Now, we are still waiting for the Supreme Court to issue a ruling on those tariffs, and that could come anytime between now and June, as uh, the Supreme Court's term is at the end of June. They could end up um, doing that. They could have a term, or they could have their decision in June. They could decide it now. And I think what they're waiting for is trying to find a way to end Donald Trump and these tariffs without forcing the government to repay them. Now, we don't know the exact total of what has been paid in, but um, that they've claimed that the administration has the money to repay them if they have to, which contradicts the trillions of dollars Donald Trump claims is actually coming in that has been paid by the American consumer. But if those tariffs get refunded, who gets the money? Well, it'd go back to the companies that paid them initially, except they've already passed those costs on to the consumer. Now, do you think they're going to lower their prices if those tariffs go away? Probably not. And what's going to happen is they're going to put it on their bottom line. They're going to call it profits on the year, and they're going to give their CEOs and their top execs, big bonuses. And I think we need to take notice of any companies if that happens, and we can show them exactly what we think of it by not supporting them and not giving them our business. These companies think they can just do whatever they want, and we will continue to go out and support them. And we really shouldn't. We can't keep doing that. Um, so we're waiting to see what is going to happen with those tariffs. Like I said, Congress has already passed one resolution saying that this national emergency is over. They're talking about more. And that's not the only thing that has happened where the Congress has broken from Donald Trump. And just between the other vote, the vote that allowed them to take this vote, because Speaker of the House Mike Johnson was trying to end up passing a bill or a rule anyway that would prevent the House from talking about the tariffs again all the way out to July. And that vote failed because he barely has a majority. Well, that vote fails, and now this fails by an even larger margin. And that is the thing here. The Republicans, the more this gets closer and closer to the midterms, and as we are getting closer to uh, dealing with it, as their majority is in jeopardy right now, um, they are going to become more and more willing to turn on Donald Trump. Also, we are watching for people to retire. I think we are up to 32 members of the House that have either said they are not seeking reelection, that they are retiring, or are retiring early. Now we are still waiting for an official announcement from Neil Dunn out of Tennessee or out of the Tallahassee uh, district for Florida. But with that retirement, if he does retire, that brings the Republican majority to under 218. 218 being the exact halfway point of the House, and the number needing to have uh, a majority in order to elect a speaker. Now, a speaker's already been elected. They have Mike Johnson until there is a vote of no confidence. And if at any point the Democrats gain the majority, they can call for a vote of no confidence. And while there is less than a majority in either party, if there was a vote today, somebody on one side or the other would have to break rank and vote for somebody of the other party. And I think at this point it would be more likely that Republicans would break rank and elect a Democrat trying to, uh, you know, save their chances in the midterms. So some of the pressure and some of the heat comes off of them. So we're watching that too, and we're waiting to see what happens. Well, speaking of the midterms, there is a race for Senate in New Mexico. And it sounds like, from what I am reading, that not only is the Republican candidate for Senate, as well as believe at least one or two, I don't know if they were state or federal House reps, um, in New Mexico missed deadlines to get signatures in on petitions in order to actually qualify for the ballot. So they're not going to be on the ballot, um, and they are not going to be on the primary because the primaries are coming up. And if you are not on the primary ballot, you are not eligible to be on the November ballot. Now, there could be some lawsuits over this, and they could try to do what they can to, make sure that their party has a nominee. But it's looking like, at least for the Senate race in November, that there is not going to be a Republican challenger to the Democrat. And if that's the case, I mean, there could always be a write in. Don't get me wrong, they could have a write in candidate. So the Republican could launch a write me in style campaign, but I don't see that working. And when that happens, what we could be looking at is potentially the option now for Democrats to spend less money in New Mexico trying to defend that seat. And that would move things. That would change the math for the rest of the country as far as having um, any kind of uh, seat or any kind of chance of flipping the Senate, rather. The simple fact is, Democrats need to flip 4 seats. And any seat that they don't have to defend, any seat that they can gain an edge on or help out, helps them flip and get that much closer to flipping the Senate. Okay. Going back to Pam Bondi talking in the House Oversight Committee about the Epstein files for a little bit. Donald Trump came to her defense. And of course, he says she did a fantastic job. Now, if you've watched any of that, she did not do a fantastic job. It was an embarrassment. It was ridiculous. She comes out, didn't hardly answer any questions from the Democrats, um, was very rude, uh, got called out for perjury, wouldn't acknowledge the victims behind her and apologize to them for, uh, you know, not redacting their names and letting some of their information out and things like that. It was a bad showing by Pam Bondi. But Donald Trump comes out, says it was fantastic, and oh, she did great, and all this, saying at least right now he has her back. Now, that could actually backfire on them because, again, this is going to be something Democrats can run on in the midterms. But beyond that, it just shows how out of touch he is. And it's going to lead to more and more questions about what is going on with the DOJ, what is going on with the Epstein files. Now, they claim there is more investigations into other co-conspirators. Now, one of the names not brought up by Pam Bondi or anybody really, as far as whether or not there's an active investigation, is Donald Trump. They were talking about the fact that Trump is in the files. She seemed to ignore it. They are sticking with the idea that Donald Trump did nothing wrong, and they were trying to talk about this the story that came out that there is a document in there that claims right after the investigation was launched with the Southern District of Florida, all the way back, I think it was in 2007, that Donald Trump, called a sheriff or something and said, "Hey, I'm glad you are looking into it. I know this, 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 and this about Epstein. Oh, he was a bad man. And I know he was at these parties, and I know there were underage girls there, and sounds like he was trying to turn evidence, and that the Republicans are going to try to use that as their justification, saying that Donald Trump was some kind of an informant. What they don't realize, by claiming he was an informant, that he was actually admitting, or that is actually admitting that he did something wrong, because typically they don't come up to an average person on the street and say, "Hey, do you want to be an FBI informant? We're going to send you undercover to go get this information." They would use one of their own. What would happen instead is they would get somebody in that sphere get some leverage on them and say, hey, we know you did X, Y, and Z. If you want to avoid prosecution, you're going to work with us and you're going to collect evidence and you're going to tell us what you know. And that's typically how you get an informant. And for them to say that Donald Trump was an FBI informant is, well, you know, it's horrible at best. Say, by saying either they want us to believe that we don't know exactly how FBI informants work, or they want to do this thing with it and say that, you know, he was actually part of it. And they think we're dumb enough not to realize what they're saying. So they're trying to latch onto this report that Donald Trump talked to this sheriff. And I actually believe that Donald Trump maybe did call this in, and not for the reasons that the Republicans would want us to believe. They would want us to believe he did it out of the goodness of his heart, which I don't think he has, and that he did it because of wanting to protect the victims, etc. And I don't think that was it either. I think what he was doing was giving himself cover. He thought if even then that he was afraid of this all coming out and coming down and crashing down around him. So he figured if he called in a tip, that maybe they wouldn't look at him directly and say it was just Epstein. So during this whole hearing, which there was some irony here, Jim Jordan was running the committee and he was, under subpoena by the January 6th committee and didn't show up for his own subpoena, and he had been under criminal investigation himself, or at least congressional investigation for his acts in something else. And of course, he's trying to act like this is um, a serious event. And while it should have been, the fact that who was running it, and because he was also connected to Ohio State and the abuse scandal with the wrestling team, it seemed disingenuous. But he was talking at some point, he made comments about Don Lemon and Don Lemon going into this church to go ahead and uh, try to cover a story as a reporter to figure out, you know, whether or not this church was supporting ICE and turning people into ICE. And as part of it, he apparently disrupted a service and they were trying to get him charged, and the charges didn't stick. But uh, what happened then is he made a comment in this hearing about the Epstein files, and he said, "Well, you can't come into Congress and disrupt their proceedings. There's limits to your First Amendment right. You can go outside and you can protest in the street, but you can't disrupt Congress from doing their job." And the thing is, the Epstein, or not the Epstein, the January 6th investigation was into the events surrounding January 6th, where Donald Trump supporters and MAGAs broke into the Capitol. They stormed the Capitol, all with the idea of trying to overturn the results of an election. And that they were there trying to prevent Congress from, accepting Joe Biden as the rightful winner of the election because he did win. Now, I did a video on this the other day, and there was somebody in my comments, a MAGA, comes out and says, "Well, no, January 6th was trying to get Congress to uh, realize that there was actually massive fraud." Well, there were 60 plus court cases, and the attorneys that represented Donald Trump would come out before court or after court and talk about how there was massive fraud and they have all this evidence. But then in court, they would say, well, we don't have any evidence. We just think there might be some. Or, well, we're not alleging fraud. They would say all kinds of things like that. And they lost all of their court cases. And in fact, several of the attorneys that represented Donald Trump, including Rudy Giuliani, lost their law license over it. But you guys never heard that story because Fox News didn't talk about it like that. They just kept playing up this idea that there was fraud. And then, of course, Donald Trump gives you the talking point of, oh, it was stolen, it was stolen. Um, and you believed it. And a large number of his supporters stormed the Capitol, disrupted Congress, and Jim Jordan was at least suspected and under investigation for being a part of it. And uh, him saying, "Well, you can't disrupt Congress to do that," and prevent them from doing it was ironic and almost hypocritical. But what would you expect from Republicans? Now, Chuck Schumer and another Democratic senator, whose name escapes me right now as I'm recording this, came out and they introduced an embezzlement bill. And you would think embezzlement is already illegal, and it is to an extent. But this bill, and I don't expect it to pass the U.S. Senate this term. I'm hoping that they are going to do what the Republicans would always do in this situation and put feet to fire and have them record, their votes on record of preventing this from happening. And what is this embezzlement bill? Well, this embezzlement bill is on not allowing president, vice president, members of the cabinet, members of uh, Congress, and I believe a few others from profiting out of lawsuits against the federal government while they are in office, or I believe from any time while they would have been in office. So they wouldn't just be allowed to turn around and, well, okay, I resigned today and I'm launching a lawsuit for something that happened while I was in Congress yesterday. Um, that kind of thing. Now, this stems because of a couple of things. One, it had to do with Donald Trump suing. Uh, he's got a couple lawsuits going. He's suing the DOJ, and he thinks he deserves a big payday, in part because of the Jack Smith investigations into both January 6th and his possession of classified documents and the fact his home was searched and all of that. He thinks he deserves a big payday for that. Because, well, I was never convicted of any of it. Yeah, the charges were dropped only because you became president and because you were able to stall things out long enough because you had a pet judge down in Florida who delayed things, and made rulings in such a way that they really weren't appealable. Um, so you want to get paid for that. You're suing the IRS for $10 billion because I believe it was in 2018. Your taxes got leaked by a rogue IRS agent or employee, rather. I don't know if it was an actual agent, but an IRS employee who accessed your files and leaked your taxes to the media. And you say that is worth $10 billion. But it's beyond that. You're also saying that because you're the president, you can just direct the DOJ to settle it and not even negotiate and settle it for the amount you said. And then when it comes to members of Congress, we are talking about the senators, Republican senators, who had tried to sneak something into a bill and did, that ultimately got repealed, but it was going to allow Republican senators to sue the DOJ for $500,000 each per time that their phone records were taken and for different things. Like if text messages were looked at, it was like $500,000. If they physically had your phone, it was $500,000. If they looked at your call records, it was $500,000. If they accessed your voicemail, it was $500,000. That kind of thing. So Chuck Schumer and uh, I wish I could remember the other Democrat came out and said, we're going to introduce a bill to prevent that. Now, they're not preventing the lawsuits. No, what are they doing? That if you get that kind of a penalty or that kind of a payment from the DOJ, you get a tax penalty of 100% on those earnings. So why would you then sue the government? Well, it would mean that instead of getting cash payout, yeah, you would have to pay it all right back to the taxpayer because you are not going to profit like that off of the government. Um, so then the big change from suing the government over something like that happening would be for them to change policies and to make an actual um, effective change to how things happen so it doesn't happen again. Now, I don't expect this bill to pass the Senate, and I would be surprised if the House takes it up this term. However, this shows that they are watching, they are looking into it, and they are going to come up with something in order to have, a path forward, right? The when the Democrats take back over in 29 after the 28th general, I firmly believe a Democrat is going to have the presidency. Then I expect to see this bill brought back up, and it will probably be passed then. Um, and potentially, it is possible that they could turn around and end up, uh, passing it now with enough pressure on Republicans because they have such a thin majority in the House that if it passes, I doubt Donald Trump would actually sign it if he is told about it. But as I was talking about earlier, if it just gets passed and he's not told about it and it sits on his desk after 10 business days, not counting Sundays, um, it becomes law. And maybe it would be a thing where if nobody tells him about it, he would end up, uh, you know, just letting it go and letting it become a law because he doesn't read anything. He doesn't have any natural curiosity. He doesn't look into anything unless they tell him about it. Um, so that is part of it. Now, we will see if the Senate even takes it up. I don't know if the Senate is even going to attempt it. Remember, Democrats are not in control of either chamber of Congress right now. So they are at the mercy of Republicans. And that is one of the things I keep seeing from people saying, well, where are the Democrats? Why aren't they doing anything? Well, they can only do so much. If they want to bring something up, they need Republican support to do it. And for the most part, Republicans aren't supporting them. So they're having to fight this, right? Like they're doing what they can. And it's going to be an uphill battle for them as we deal with it. Okay. Um, the Democrats only have so much power right now while they are in the minority. When it comes to the midterms, we need to get out, we need to vote, we need to give the Democrats a majority again so they can actually do something and start, potentially stopping things for this administration, doing anything. Now, what can they do? Well, if they have control of the House, they can start investigations, they can hold congressional hearings, they can shine lights into everything related to everything this administration is doing. They can look into all of the allegations of wrongdoing by ICE. They can look into allegations of, um, you know, groups like the Three Percenters, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, Patriot Front, and others having been swept into ICE. And they can do all kinds of things like that. They can look into other actions by this administration and shine a light on it. They could potentially impeach and force this administration to defend in a Senate trial varying members of this administration for varying problems. Pete Hegseth for multiple issues with the Department of Defense. You could get Kristi Noem for the operation of ICE, Pam Bondi and Kash Patel over the Epstein files. Donald Trump for a slew of problems, including the Epstein files, including his handling of international affairs, his unilateral signing off on striking boats in uh, the Caribbean and off the coast of Venezuela, et cetera, and violating international law that way. His tying up of federal money. They could look into who authorized and who's all responsible for the destruction of the East Wing and all kinds of things, right? They can look into all of it and they can have public hearings. Now, if they get control of the Senate, I don't see any way forward that they could have 67 votes in the Senate to actually fully remove somebody on impeachment, but they would be able to control the impeachment proceeding, which would mean they could prevent the Republicans from just dismissing charges outright. They would be able to determine the rules and proceedings as far as the admission of evidence, etc. and do all of that. And then beyond that, they could also prevent Donald Trump from getting any more nominees through for anything, including the Supreme Court, which would be huge. So those are some bigger events. Now, tomorrow, Friday, is the funding deadline for the Department of Homeland Security, kind of. This would be a third partial shutdown of the government. Well, second partial, third shutdown overall of this administration. And is DHS going to be completely broke if they don't pass this funding? No, because the one big bullshit bill did have DHS funding in it. There is going to be some areas that are going to need additional funding, um, but places like ICE have additional funding. They would still be able to operate. Um, and it doesn't sound like they have come to any sort of an agreement. Republicans are not playing ball. Now, what do the Democrats want in exchange for funding ICE? Well, they want simple things. If they want us to treat uh, ICE like an equal branch of law enforcement, then they say that ICE should have to wear body cameras, which doesn't seem unreasonable to me. They say those body cameras should be on. They want to end the roaming patrols. They want to draw down ICE and not have it be thousands deep in one city like they currently are, and go back to having ICE operate the way it used to operate, and quit doing, where they did do some employment raids, but they wouldn't just show up randomly, force their way into businesses, or try to force their ways into homes. They want more penalties for not following warrant rules. Um, they want them to have to not wear masks, and I'd be easily identifiable. Now, we are hearing that if that mask rule goes into effect, that a large number of ICE agents are going to resign. At least that is what is being talked about in places like Reddit and other forums where ICE agents are talking to each other publicly. They're saying they don't want their identities out and known because of how bad it's going to be for them for having done the things they've done, right? They don't want to deal with it. So what are they going to do? I don't know if this is going to pass or not, right? There is enough public support to actually justify it. The thing is, would Donald Trump sign it? Much like everything else, who knows? It depends what he is being told um, about that. If he is being told the truth, or is he being told what he wants to hear? So we don't know if he'll sign it if they pass anything for DHS funding. But that funding is set to expire tomorrow on Friday. Um, and that's bad news for DHS and ICE. Now, like I said, some of ICE's abilities are not going to be affected because they got a whole ton of extra money in the one big beautiful bill. Um, but the simple fact that uh, the rest of DHS did not get that same kind of funding, it is going to be shut down. I don't remember the last time there were three separate shutdowns, regular or partial at all, during one administration. It just shows you how inept this administration is about being able to actually keep things funded, and how they are able to actually keep things going. Now, Donald Trump is probably going to push to try to get them to cut a deal. He is going to want to have he is going to want to have the Republicans in Congress work with the Democrats, because he is not going to want the embarrassment of another government shutdown, because he takes the brunt of that. Now, uh, that being said, uh, Donald Trump is still a narcissist. He's going to want what he wants. He's going to want them to come up with some kind of a deal, but it's not going to be the type of deal Democrats would sign off on. It's not going to have all of the reforms. He's just going to want them to fund his project and to move on. Now, last night they passed the SAVE Act again in the House, and I'm seeing a lot of people freaking out about the SAVE Act. First of all, I don't think it gets past the Senate again. This is like the third or fourth variation that the House has tried to pass under Republican control, going all the way back to 22. Since the Republicans retook the House under the Biden administration, they've been trying to do this. Um, but what do they want to limit? Well, they want to limit people from voting by mail. They want to limit what is considered early voting and how you can qualify for early voting. They want you to have an ID to vote, which most states already require an ID. Or if you don't have an ID, they give you alternate ways to identify yourself. A couple of the ways you can do it here in Iowa would be, I believe you can take in a couple of pieces of mail, but they have to have your current address, obviously your name, and it can't just be occupant at your address. It has to be to you specifically, or it can't be to your name or current occupant. Like it has to be something official. And I think one of them has to be from some kind of, uh, they can't just be personal correspondence either. It would have to be like a bill or something from like the city. Maybe like something from the water department or something about, you know, something regarding your property taxes or whatever the case may be. Something like that. You can bring in mail. Or I think Iowa also has the option where if I don't have my ID, but I've got my family member with me, they can, sign attesting that I am who I say I am and that I am a citizen and I can vote. If you do any of those things, you get a provisional ballot. And what happens with a provisional ballot is, yes, it does get counted. However, it gets counted last. And that is in case somebody shows up claiming to be me at any point in time. Like using myself as the example, if I show up without an ID and I just show my pieces of mail and that's how I get my ballot, but somebody else shows up with an ID that scans and is valid and it is claiming to be me, um, and they cast a ballot, they would only take one vote. You wouldn't get both ballots. Um, And when it comes to it, you would have, beyond that, you also get a provisional ballot if you vote at the wrong precinct. Let's say you moved and you didn't realize that you had a new polling location. You just showed up where you were at, where you were used to. They would tell you, hey, you showed up at the wrong location. We're going to give you a provisional ballot. And a lot of times here, at least from what I've seen here in Iowa, um, you would still get to vote for the uh, stuff that doesn't matter which polling location you're at. But if it's like, well, you're in the wrong ward for city council, for example, you wouldn't get a vote for um, that council seat, right? You wouldn't get a vote for the wrong seat. And as long as nobody else tried to vote as you at the right location, um, they would count your provisional ballot. But they want you to have an ID. And they want your ID to match your birth certificate. Now, there's all kinds of reasons as to why your name wouldn't match your birth certificate. And somebody in the comments, when I talked about this, brought up JD Vance. Well, JD Vance has changed his name several times. So he would have to have his birth certificate and every change form every time he has changed his name, along with the ID, in order to vote under their own rules. He wouldn't be allowed to cast a ballot. And for some of the people saying, well, you should have access to all of your documents, not everybody has those. For whatever reason, maybe you've never needed one in your life. Think about it. When was the last time you needed your birth certificate for anything? You only need them for certain events, uh, you know, and maybe you don't have it, okay? Or you need a passport. Okay, well, only half of Americans actually have a passport. So that's half of Americans who would not be able to go cast a vote. Um, and who has, so not everybody has all of their legal documents. So if you were married and you got a divorce and you changed your name back, okay, do you have, you would potentially need all three documents. You would have your birth certificate, your legal name change, and, your legal change back with the divorce decree. That isn't necessarily feasible for everybody, and those copies are not free. So requiring some kind of an ID, and when they're saying that, well, your real ID or your state driver's license may not be valid as a form of identification, specifically if it doesn't match your birth certificate. Well, um, then that means we've got other problems. Like you got to have all these documentation. And if you have to get a different ID, again, those are all costs, and those become then a poll tax. And you are not allowed to charge a poll tax. Why? Because after the Civil War, what they would do with the poor South and the recently freed slaves is they would charge a poll tax. And well, oh, if you couldn't come up with the money and you couldn't go vote, well then yeah, you might be free, but you don't get a vote. You don't get a say. It has been illegal for that long. So charging for an ID and then having these documents that are not free be more money is effectively a poll tax. And this disenfranchises more than just immigrants. Now, they are saying it is all because of immigrants. That is their whole big push over this. But the idea is most immigrants do not vote. There's hardly ever cases of undocumented immigrants, illegal immigrants voting. Why? Because that is a crime. And most of them, despite what MAGA would tell you, the only crime they ever really commit is showing up here illegally. They are trying to stay under the radar. Yeah, they are. Some of them are working and sending the money back. Yeah, I get that. But they're not trying to actively commit other major crimes. They want to be ignored so they can keep working and supporting their families and doing those kind of things. They're not going to attempt to vote. But Republicans are trying to use the SAVE Act as a way of pushing forward their agenda, and they also want to get it out there and they want to get votes going so that Republicans can run on the fact that the Democrats blocked it or didn't allow it to pass and say, well, see, these evil Democrats, they just want undocumented immigrants. They're trying to stick with the culture war bullshit. It's not entirely going to work, but that's their plan. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of the Analytical Iowan podcast. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today. Hope you have a great day, and I will be back yet again tomorrow with even more because there's always stuff to talk about.